Events, they really do come in every shape and size. And in your career, if you go into one of the mass comm professions, you will probably encounter events on one side or the other. Corgi races, it's a thing. So let's think about the type of events. And this is not an exhaustive list, it's just sort of an example, right? So as journalists, you might find yourself writing about covering speakers and conferences and meetings like government meetings, the legislature or city council or community town hall meeting, the arts like concerts, theater, and art installation, sports, which definitely are events, and there's a lot more to sports than that, but sporting events, announcements, business openings, nonprofits doing things, funerals, weddings for important people. We don't cover them for just anybody. So it's just the list is long. And so if you're in the strategic communication side of the profession, then PR, primarily this would be their job, although, it's Stratcom, so things get very sort of done as a family. You might find yourself writing about these events, so you definitely could find yourself creating them, producing them, being sort of the event planner. But more and more PR professionals actually are doing coverage of these events that they put on. So what are you going to do? You're going to cover the same things, right? So if your organization, say the NBA, right? So the NBA has got basketball. They also have people who write about the sport themselves, right? So they have media rights about it, but also people on the NBA team. Same thing for, businesses or government meetings. So the public information officer for the city or the ledge will also write a story about that. It's just a way of sort of cutting out the middleman, right? So we find that we are called upon to cover events all the time. There's a couple of things that we don't want to do and some things that we do want to do. So if you can write the lead before the event starts, then it's probably not the lead you really want to write, right? It's probably not the lead you want to write. So let me show you a couple examples. So bad leads. Some big name person spoke someplace in town on Friday. Yeah, we knew that before the thing even happened, so that's just way too basic and doesn't give new information. Or, we do sort of one notch up from that is more than 200 people came to see this big name person someplace in town on Friday. Again, not really added value for people who want to see what happened at the event. Now, sometimes we write about it ahead of time. It's called an advance. And then we do, we even hope we're better in the lead than that. But sometimes we focus on the time and place. So something, if you're covering an event, it's more likely that you want to talk about the outcome, certainly if it's a sporting event or something like that. But say it's just a speaker who is making a presentation, you want to find something the speaker said, something you can sort of hang your hat on, as it were. So something like this: if this policy doesn't change, generations will be lost. This big name person told a standing room only crowd someplace in town on Friday. And then if you use this kind of a lead, it would more naturally be followed by a quote in the second paragraph that sort of makes some of this point, right? Not exactly that point, not like here we say it here and here we're repeating it in the quote, but sort of the next natural step from there. So the big consideration is that you're a media professional. You're not a stenographer. The idea isn't to record every single thing that happened and then just regurgitate that. It's not about a transcript and then offering up the transcript. You have to make the decision. That's why you're going to get paid the big bucks. You have to decide of all the things that happened during this hour-long talk or this day-long festival or this, marathon meeting, you have to decide what the most important elements are. And, sometimes you're worried that you're going to be wrong. You just got to do it. Otherwise, you're a squirrel. Sometimes you're doing it in this big media scrum, right? Like this huge group of journalists. And when you look at this group, it might be that some of these are journalists and some of them are actually PR people there to cover the event for various perspectives. Whatever the case, that's a lot of people, and everybody's going to be producing something on this. And sometimes we worry that, what if mine isn't the right one? You're in charge, right? So make a decision. It is the right one for this moment. And if there's somebody who differs with you, well, that's why we all have editors. A couple of rules. You can't have it all. I know you think you can, but basically you're not a stenographer. You cannot and should not include everything said in the hour or all of the events that happened during this day at this conference. Less is actually more, right? So focusing actually makes it a more compelling story. So you have to focus in. That means you're going to have to leave some things out. And sometimes it's painful because sometimes so many good things happened, it's hard to decide what to leave out. But that's your job. Focus. So let's talk about some details. Devils are always in the details, right? So most events, you've got to include some of these elements, right? So how many people attended? And you often have to be the one to count. You might ask ahead of time, how many does this auditorium hold? And then you look around and see sort of how many empty seats you see. Sometimes you've got to figure out like a crowd estimate, like on the Washington Mall, right? So there's lots of sort of ways to do some of that. You want to know who sponsored the event, right? Why is it happening? What's the purpose of the event? Some background for context. So you really need to be well informed before you go, because if you get a chance to ask questions or need to ask questions, you've got to be smart about it, right? And you need to, usually you get one chance to hear something, so it needs to make sense to you so you can figure out like how important is that? Is this the first time this has been said? How does that work? And sometimes something unexpected happens, right? So sometimes the speaker singles somebody out in the crowd, or this thing ends early, or for goodness sake, there's a fire, whatever. Like if there's something that unusual happens, you've got to be on the lookout for that. Some things you might want to include that we sometimes include: how long it lasted, who is in the audience, if there are dignitaries or famous people, that sort of stuff. Sometimes you want quotes from the audience, right? Reaction, we call that reaction to the event. And sometimes you want quotes from the speaker, or people who were involved. It's sort of an added value for people who weren't there, right? Or people who were there but didn't see this other sort of extra information. And sometimes there are actually results from what happened. So sometimes what you're doing is putting together all of these different pieces to create this more complete and compelling story. So event coverage is, on the one hand, quite simple. On the other hand, it can be complex, and it's really important to be prepared. There you go. Cover an event.